Good morning and welcome to the Congressional Black Caucus and the Authors Literary Circle. I'm Cheryl Washington. I'm the president and CEO of East Baltimore Development Incorporated, and I am delighted to be here with one of our featured authors who happens to be my mother, Dr. Hattie Washington. Hi, Mom.
Hi, sweetie. Hi, everyone. I'm just absolutely delighted to be here at the Congressional Black Caucus, the 53rd Legislative Black Caucus. So just happy that everybody's here and everybody's well and moving very well with what you're doing in life, driven to succeed.
So, my mom is here to highlight two of her books that she authored in her retirement. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about your first book, Driven to Succeed, and what was the impetus for you to write this book, and tell the audience a little bit about what the book is about.
Driven to Succeed is a book about my life. It's a memoir, but it's also an inspirational book whereby it talks about how I went from a tragedy sort of to triumph and to thriving in spite of the challenges that I faced as growing up as a child. And so it talks about back in the day when I went to a two-room schoolhouse and the school closed in 1959 because of massive resistance due to the Brown versus Board of Education, where Prince Edward County in Virginia didn't want to integrate the schools. So rather than integrating the schools, they closed the schools down for 5 years. And my father, being a wise man that he was, and being involved with the NAACP, he knew that the schools were going to be closed for more than a year. And he decided to send the family away. He broke the family up. Some of us he sent to Norfolk, and some of the other half siblings he sent to Baltimore. So it was very traumatic. And I wrote about how traumatized I was and what it did to me trying to finish middle school and high school and other things that happened in my life and other parts of the book.
So one of the things that I do know about you, I know, of course, I know a lot about you, and I've read the book, but I'm always amazed at how you were the first in our family to actually go to college.
Yes.
To get an advanced degree.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about what motivated you to actually focus on education, particularly when nobody in the family at that time was focused on education, and then how that then caused you to raise my sister, my brother, and I to be what we are.
Well, it's so funny that my father only got a third grade education, but he was his own businessman and he had a lot of people working for him. And he broke the family up for education purposes. He did not want us to be out of school he didn't know it was going to take 5 years, but he knew it was going to take more than a year. So when he sent me away, I remember seeing a tear in his eye, how hard that was to make that decision to send us away he didn't know how we were going to be treated, and I was treated not very nicely, but for education purposes. That was his goal for us because he wanted us to have education. And he said education was going to be our key to success. So I always knew that I was going to finish high school, but I didn't have any dreams of going to college. But I have to tell you how that happened if you ask.
Well, I definitely want to. I love that story. But talk a little bit about how, becoming the first college graduate, the first PhD, EDD, how that then in turn, what were some of the things that motivated you to push my sister, myself? So, I'm a lawyer, my sister's a doctor, my brother's in IT, and you raised us to focus on education. And so,
well, actually, when I went to Booker T. Washington High School, I was an honor student. But it's so interesting that the council did not get me ready for college. And that had a lot to do with the fact that I didn't have anybody coming to any of the activities, no parental involvement. And apparently they assumed that I was not going to college. Now, even though I was a National Honor Society student, so nobody got me ready for college. I used to get on the bus every day and go past Norfolk State on my way to Booker T. And I always look over there and said, I'm going there one day. But I didn't know how you get there. I just knew there it was. And I was going to get off the bus one day and I'm going there. So that's exactly what I did. So when I walked in Norfolk State to Tower Hall, you went to Norfolk State, so you know Tower
and
Hall.
my sister did too.
And I walked in and at the information desk, I walked up just as big. I said, I'm looking for my homeroom. And she said, excuse me. I said, I plan to go here. But I don't know where my homeroom is. Could you help me find my homeroom?
Right.
She said, have you been admitted? And I looked at her strange. You know, I was the first in my family to go to college. I didn't know what you're talking about. She said, have you applied? And I still looked at her like, applied? So one thing about HBCU, she took me by the hand, took me down the hall, and had me she said to the registration, this young lady plans to go here, but I don't think she has applied. So nobody made fun of me. They just sat me down and said, this is what you need to fill out. So I filled it out, and the rest is history.
And that story makes me think about two other very pivotal and critical things that you did, right? So you started a nonprofit, and the book speaks about this, focused on foster children, kids, mostly boys, particularly Black boys, but who have no family support, which talks about your upbringing.
Yes.
And then you also worked as a tenured professor and the first female vice president at Coppin State College, in Coppin, for anybody who knows Coppin, is a HBCU, but it's focused on those students who may not otherwise go to college. First generation. So talk about how your experience and your upbringing led you to do those two things.
Well, when my father sent me away, I had to become a foster kid. And even though I was staying with a relative, my father had to declare me a ward of the state so she could get paid. And so I was a foster kid. So when I became assistant superintendent of Baltimore City School and I saw foster kids in my school system that would stand on the corner in the middle of the day, and I found out they were foster kids, I had an affinity for those kids. It just touched my heart. So I wanted to know why you're out of school, and I took them home for one night.
Oh, I remember.
And of course, because they took your room.
That's right.
One had your room and one had Sherelle's room.
That's right.
And you all were away in medical school and law school. And so I didn't plan to keep them for maybe one night, 1 week. And then 22 years later, we raised over 100 foster kids.
And you also had an indelible impact at Coppin. And talk about your endowed scholarship fund that you created.
Well, you know, when foster kids reach 18, they age out of the foster care system.
Right.
So I was the first group home that got an exception, thank the Lord for Glendenning, to keep my foster boys to the age 21, because it gave me a chance to get them out of high school, because most times at 18, they're not even finished high school. So we could get them out of high school and get them to BCC if we needed to, because many were in special education. And gave me a chance to have them come back to Unhattie's place every night, even though they were in BCC, till they got ready to go to Coppin State. And then I have a scholarship at Coppin State for my foster boys to go and stay on campus, because now they're homeless.
That's right.
And it's a year-round scholarship. But they stay during holidays and summers. The scholarship pays for all of that, so that they can stay there. That's their home until they graduate.
So one thing I know about you is you're passionate about kids, passionate about education. But another thing that many may not know about you is that you're also passionate about cooking.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to change the topic from your first book, Driven to Succeed, to your second book, which happens to be Hattie's Cookbook, Southern Comfort Favorite Food Favorites.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about what made you do this book and what this book actually shares.
Well, that's so beautiful. The first book, Driven to Succeed, had lessons learned through faith, family, and favor. So the lessons learned in that book, you got to get driven to succeed, because that is my brand,
right,
on all kinds of hats and paraphernalia.
Right, you have merchandise. People can buy,
They can go to the website.
That's right.
In fact, it's www.driven2succeed.com.
That's right.
In one of the chapters in the Driven to Succeed book, I talk about growing up in the country, and everything we ate was from the garden. my stepmother, my father killed hogs, milked the cow, churned the butter, did the eggs, peach cobblers, peaches from the tree, apples from the tree, all fresh vegetables and fresh fruits. And I didn't know anything about organic because we just used the manure from the
Right.
grass and we just
That's
did
about as organic as you can get.
before we knew there was a word called organic.
Right.
And so I talked about that in one of the chapters, that the peach cobblers and the fried chicken and the biscuits made with lard and so on. And so many people asked me, so, okay, when you're doing a cookbook?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I don't plan to do a cookbook. I got so many requests. Now, when are you doing a cookbook? Because that chapter made me so hungry. So I started writing down all my recipes. And then when I wrote the recipes, my stepmother didn't measure anything. She would use a fishful of flour and just some
Pinch of
fishful of
this
and a pinch of that and a dash of that. So I had to cook for 2 years almost to measure everything because I was going to do a cookbook. Now you can't say a pinch of this and a handful of flour. So that was the labor of love that I started cooking my dishes. I was cooking everything for all the family, and took 2 years later. And then after I did the recipes, then I had to have pictures professionally taken. Like, I mean, I took a picture of this fried chicken, and my videographer, who's, by the way, here now, Bruce Smallwood, said, you can't show that
best
chicken.
videographer out there.
You can't show that. I got to have a professional food chef to cook 30% of your recipes. And then he went over, Bruce Smallwood from Mount Vernon Marketing, took pictures of a dish. You thought he was doing a modeling session with the lighting and this for fried chicken or whatever. And so those were professionally done. And then Bruce laid out the book, and there it is.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I mean, just the cover, everything, all the pictures. Yeah. But one thing that I love about this book that you can talk about too is, now, back when you were raised and everything was organic and fresh, then we got to the standard American diet and people were becoming obese, and there's lots of preservatives in foods. One of the things that I love about your book is you also give healthy alternatives to Southern cooking recipes. Absolutely. So talk a little bit about why you did that.
Yeah, one of the reasons, as I grew up and was still love to cook and trying to cook healthy, you don't find as many fresh fruits unless I go on the Eastern Shore and pick up. I always stop at these little local stands to get my fresh peaches and apples and so on. But when you go into the store, you have to get what's there. And so I thought, if you don't want to use sugar, what can you use in place of sugar? If you don't want to use Crisco, which you shouldn't use Crisco.
Right. Now we know.
Right. Lard. And people look at you like, lard? That's fattening. Lard is a good fat.
That's right.
And see, a lot of people misunderstand what a good fat is versus bad fat. And I have a section in my book, good fat versus bad fat. And I got the research articles to go with it. I have a research article about margarine that did a study at Harvard University and Johns Hopkins, where they put out a stick of margarine. The rats didn't eat it, the gnats didn't eat it, the flies didn't eat it, and it didn't go bad for 6 months.
Wow.
But yet we're eating that, and animals and gnats and fleas got more sense than we have.
That's right.
And it's a lot of food that you eat is so toxic for your body, but it's cheap to make, and people are buying it and eat it. So in the back of my book, we won an award for just the directory in my book, because all of the research articles behind what you should eat: brown eggs versus white eggs.
That's right.
Honey versus sugar, and what are the substitutes that you can put in food to try to make your food as healthy as you possibly can.
I love it. Now, I know you get requests all the time from family, friends, and others for you to make certain recipes.
Yes.
What are some of your favorites?
Well, you can answer
I can tell
that.
you my own. I mean, the bread pudding, your chili, your macaroni and cheese. But what are some of the ones that other people like
Those
to talk about?
are the ones. When I taught at Compton State, and once a month we had a faculty meeting, and everybody at Washington, we put you on the hospitality committee. I said, okay. So they would fight over, I want her to bring a chili. And they said, no, I want her to bring the mac and cheese. They said, no, I want her to bring the bread pudding. I said, hey, is this a meeting between eating?
Right.
Or so let me bring all three. And oh my goodness, all down the hall, everybody wants to come to the meeting when I'm there. But I just love cooking things. I love creating food. I create something, and people say, well, what is this? This made some leftover mashed potatoes that I just put some eggs in and then made a potato cake. Or I just thought of something that had some cabbage left over and some noodles. And I put it in the pot with some chicken and made a soup. Said it's vegetable soup. Yeah, you can call it vegetable soup. But I just love to create things. That's what my stepmother used to do in the country. Just put everything together and flavor it. She put a little garlic, salt, and pepper, a little dash of sugar and everything. Just makes everything taste good.
So, what I do know across every culture, food is normally the thing that brings everybody together, makes everybody feel like family. And it brings me back to Aunt Hattie's Place, the nonprofit that you started. And talk a little bit about how you created a home, family-like environment for the young men. Food was a large part of that. But just talk about some of the concepts that you put in place to really create that a family environment.
It's so interesting. When we lived in the country and we walked down the road to the house, when we got close to the house, we could smell food. Whether it was beans and hot biscuits or fried chicken or rice pudding, you start smelling the food when you walk in the door. And you're like, take off your school clothes so you don't get those clothes dirty, and you're ready to eat. It's nothing like walking in the house smelling some home cooked food. And that's the atmosphere I try to instill at Aunt Hattie's Place. When my boys come home from school, and then you all too, I want them to smell something. I don't care if it's sugar and cinnamon on the stove. Just I want them to smell something coming in the door. And another thing was soft music. When you all grew up, I always had soft music playing Escadas and so on and so on. So I want the boys to have soft music once they walk in the door and smell food. Those two senses. And be greeted with a smile. Even the secretary. I want everybody to, and Aunt Gladys and everybody to greet those boys. So many times they're coming home from school, they're not walking, they're running. Get home.
That's right. Well, you just mentioned something, Aunt Gladys. So talk a little bit about the family concept and how I know in the Black community, anybody older than us who's close to the family, whether you're a family friend, you're an aunt or an uncle. And talk about, and even if you're a cousin, but you're older, you're an aunt or uncle. Talk a little about the concept that you put
but
in
this country, my stepmother had kids already when my father married her. And then the four of us when my mother died, and then they had five together. So everybody was called aunts and uncles. Whether you were some direct kin or indirect kin, or outlaws or in-laws. So everybody was an aunt and uncle. That was a sign of respect. So I took that from her. And then when I opened Aunt Hattie's Place, and when you all were growing up, you had friends coming up to the house. They didn't call me Dr. Washington or Miss Hattie. They called me Aunt Hattie. And that was very homey. So when I tried to come up with a name for Aunt Hattie's Place, I thought, it'd be nice to say I live at Aunt Hattie's Place rather than I live in a group home. And so it just kind of stuck.
I love it. And I was fortunate to work at Aunt Hattie's Place for the first 6 years right out of law school.
We were fortunate to have you.
Well, thank you. It was one of the most rewarding experiences for me. And I tell everybody, between having to work for you as a mom with your standard of excellence and then all the things that I learned, it probably prepared me for anything else out there that I've encountered in my
work
career.
7 days a week with those kids, and you'll be on Saturdays. They got the kids with you going down the street to the movie, to church, and somebody said, that's somebody with, you didn't have a boyfriend and things, that girl is so beautiful, but she got 5 kids already. And so
no idea.
You say, well, I ain't worried about it, because she would take those kids everywhere she went, the little mother.
But I was gonna wanted you to talk about how the importance of children, particularly foster kids, when they're in school, how important it is, because you mentioned how when you went to school, you didn't have any family support. So the structure that you created on Hattie's Place, talk about the educational coordinator and how, we presented ourselves at school as their Aunt Cheryl.
Absolutely. Well, you can almost talk about that because you have wrote the
But since I'm interviewing you, I'm
But yes, I wanted to carry on that same family style that I use when I read. You all have to read a book a week and have to talk about the book and Bible verses and
our positive,
yes, ma'am,
affirmations
all over the place. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, those magic words. So we taught the boys the same way how to do that and told them who they are by taking their name, the first name, And say, for instance, name was David. Now, what are you? I'm devoted, I'm dedicated, I'm affectionate, I'm vivacious, I'm intelligent, and I am sincere. So they would take their name and come up with positive words about their name,
Right.
and they would love it.
I love it. Well, in the last few minutes that we have, why don't you talk a little bit about your merchandise that you have,
Yes.
your website, and how people can buy your books?
Well, Driven to Succeed, I have a brand called Driven, the number two Succeed. And people wear it on the t-shirts, they wear it on hats. Or you can get on all kinds of athletic gear, golf shirts. And it's so much, it's talking to yourself. Because I was self-driven and didn't have any support. If I weren't self-driven, I wouldn't be where I am today. So the paraphernalia is just a visual representation of being self-driven. So when you wear that hat, what have you, just let you know that continue on, have the glasses half full, not half empty.
Great. And what's your website?
It's www.driven, the word to succeed.com. And I got other merchandise for Kamala campaign collection.
And if somebody wanted to get on your distribution list for your monthly newsletter, how would one go about doing
They
that?
just go to my website and click contact and just fill in the form and we'll get it.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. Of course, you're my biggest role model and cheerleader, and I'm so proud of you. If you haven't come down to the Congressional Black Caucus, make sure you make it down here and enjoy the time here. Don't forget to pick up your book, the Driven to Succeed book, and your cookbook, and also your merchandise. Oh, and if you also want, you can get an apron as well. That is a pinch of this and a dash of that. All stands for the cookbook. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. God bless.